You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor, subscribe to the channel, leave your comments below, and be sure to smash that like button. ESPN.com has updated their post-spring college football SP Plus rankings. And if you're not familiar, this is Bill Conley, a self-described nerd who's been a friend of the show and come on the show for a lot of years. And he put together the SP Plus, which he releases the first one in February, then he updates the metrics after spring, and then so long as the season goes along. And really, SP Plus looks at three metrics. It's returning production, it's recent recruiting, and then it's your recent history. Basically, some information from the previous 4 seasons that kind of determine how your program has been. Okay, so he uses those 3 metrics, essentially. Now, we could look at LSU's returning production and assume it's not going to be very good because there's also a ton of production offensively. We could look at recent recruiting, which has been good, obviously, for LSU, and then their recent history. You've got back-to-back 10-win seasons after a couple of disappointing seasons in 2020 and 2021. So a little bit of a mixed bag. But even still, I'm not going to bury the lead here. I'm going to give you some big-picture takeaways. The post-spring SP Plus rankings, remember, like the way too early top 25 and all that has LSU somewhere in the low teens, like 13, 14 is generally where you see LSU in the polls, right? The way too early top 25 polls, the subjective top 25 that pundits are putting out. That's essentially what we're seeing. Like ESPN's got LSU at 14. The post-spring SP Plus rankings, again, this is just computer rankings, just a computer metric looking at those 3 things that we talked about. The post-spring SP Plus has LSU number 9 in the country. 1 spot behind Ole Miss and 1 spot ahead of Notre Dame. So your top 10 is Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon. By the way, a lot of this looks like the polls would, but there are some pretty glaring outliers. So number 1, Georgia, Ohio State, Oregon, Texas, Alabama. That's a change, seeing Bama at 5. Michigan at 6. Penn State, Ole Miss, LSU, then Notre Dame at 10. Missouri 11, Florida State 12, Texas A&M 13. They're pretty high on A&M there. Clemson, Oklahoma at 15. Tennessee, Kansas State, Utah, Miami, Oklahoma State, that rounds out the top 20. And another LSU opponent, USC, is right there at number 21. Iowa, SMU, Arizona, and Kentucky round out the top 25. And 1 spot out of the top 25 is another LSU opponent in UCLA. So I want to delve into some of my takeaways from this. I'm not saying that LSU is being sort of completely disregarded by the polls. But what is interesting is, as we look at a 12-team playoff, the consensus being you're going to have to go in the SEC 10-2 to get in. If you're 10-2, you're going to be in the top 12 and secure yourself a spot with maybe some dramatic outliers that could come up that could prevent that. But by and large, if you're a 10-win team, you're going to be in. And that's sort of evidence with how they phrased this as well. They looked at some metrics to say, okay, what are the odds of going 10-2? So they looked at SEC teams and all the leagues, the odds of being 10-2 or better. And LSU actually has a 43% chance of being 10-2, which is 20th in the country, but it's 6th in the SEC. So that's one thing that works against LSU, but still 43% chance of being 10-2. But consider already, SP Plus has LSU as the 9th best team in the country. We looked at Vegas odds, the point spreads, the way too early point spreads, and LSU was favored in every game where a point spread was released except the game at Texas A&M where they were a 3-point underdog. So LSU, you would presume, looking at spreads going into the season, would be favored in 11 of their 12 games. SP Plus thinks they're a top 10 team. Essentially, computers and objective data really like LSU a lot. The hard part is, how do you purge out of your brain like if you're a human, again, a computer's not looking at this. The computer didn't watch LSU fail to get a stop for an entire half against Missouri. The computer didn't watch LSU give up 55 to Ole Miss and lose a game where they scored 48 points and led by 9 late in the fourth quarter and gagged that game away because they couldn't get a first down to seal it late. But they're just looking at all the data that they have and saying, what should you expect from this team? And the computers like LSU way more, I think, than humans do because of as bad as the defense was and what you lost on that team a year ago. Your Heisman winning quarterback, your 2 first-round picks at receiver, all that sort of stuff. One of the things LSU certainly has working against it is returning production. Again, that's part of the metric, is your returning production metric. And what was so interesting to me, LSU returned 64% of its production. Obviously, they're 28th defensively, but 79th in offensive returning production with just 58%. You lose the talent you did offensively, and of course you're gonna be further down that list. So LSU 60th in returning production, but the way they've recruited and the recent success boosts them up the SP rankings. The one of the returning production that stood out most to me was the defending champion, Michigan. Michigan is there's 134 teams in Division I. Michigan was 126th in returning production. 126 out of 134. They had 13 players drafted. I mean, new head coach, you lose your quarterback, you lose 13 players to the NFL draft. You're 126 in returning production. I don't know how I can be bullish on Michigan this year, how anyone can be bullish on Michigan this year other than reputation. I would say the same about Alabama, quite honestly. But the other thing that, as I was kind of looking at it and looking at the these rankings, I was looking at LSU's opponents. And this is one of the things where you can look and say, okay, I get why you can be maybe a little more bullish on LSU. Of the teams you're going to play, the 12 teams you're going to play, the highest ranked is Bama at 5 and then Ole Miss at 8. Odds makers have you favored against both of them. A&M's at 13. And yes, that's a road game, but those are going to be the 3 highest ranked teams in this SP Plus that you're going to play this year. I mentioned Oklahoma's at 15, but after that, Southern Cal at 21, where you're a 6-point favorite. UCLA at 26, where you're going to be a decided home favorite. I mean, look at the rest of it. Florida at 33. South Carolina 43. Arkansas 46. South Alabama 73. Vanderbilt 97th. I mean, you're really looking at those 3 games. Alabama, Ole Miss, Texas A&M. That's your season. How do you fare in those 3 games? If you win 2 of those 3 games, you're in the playoff. If you lose 2 of those 3 games, you don't have any margin for error anywhere else. If you win them all, I mean, you're probably getting a bye. The other thing that was really interesting to me, just as I was looking at that SP Plus number, they give you like the offensive ranking, the defensive ranking, and the special teams ranking in the SP Plus. So offensive, they love LSU. The computers love LSU offensively. The computers have LSU third, the 3rd highest rating in the SP Plus. Defense, 35th. So not terrible. Even though last year was terrible, if you're looking at a 4-year sample, last year was still an outlier. But here's the one that really stings. The special teams rating for LSU, 83rd in the country. That's the one that stings. That's the outlier. That's the hidden yards. That's the hidden points, the scoring opportunities, the field position, things that we don't often pay enough attention to that we all here intuitively know. LSU's special teams have been atrocious the last 2 years, but there's a metric that puts it in front of your face. It says, as far as special teams efficiency, you're 83rd in the country. You got to fix that this year. Muse, do you have any takeaways from these?
Yeah, man, I had a few. So, obviously I went and looked at the two teams that played for the national championship last year with Michigan and Washington. And you mentioned Michigan's returning production. Washington's right there with them. They're 125th. They both returned 40% of production there. Obviously, Michigan's recruiting recently has been way better than Washington's, but I would argue that Washington hired a better head coach to replace theirs than Michigan did. Like
a proven head coach.
Yeah, much more proven. But you look at the just gap between a Michigan at 6 and Washington's at like 30. I found that interesting. Of course, Washington going into a new league as well.
That's a big part of it.
Yeah, and then I went for Alabama and A&M's returning production. I was actually surprised. A&M's returning 67% of their production. I didn't expect it to be that high with how many guys entered the portal.
Look at Milrow.
A&M.
I'm sorry.
A&M,
Bama,
not Bama. A&M returning 67% with as many guys as they had entered the portal. I actually kind of found that surprising as well.
So many, I was thinking about that just off the top of my head. When we talk about the A&M guys that went in the portal, so many of them are linemen.
Yeah, and that illustrates that, right?
Bryce Foster, Walter Nolan.
Yeah, Walter Nolan.
Fidel Diggs. There was another offensive lineman as well that went. I'm just doing this off the top of my head. But yeah, I mean, that does kind of illustrate some of the bigger names. Now, you lost Evan Stewart.
Which is a big one, yeah.
Yeah. But you get Connor Wigman back. Moose Muhammad's back another season, right?
I believe so, yes.
Muhammad's back. I'm spitballing off the top of the head. Interesting on A&M with the return productions. I mean, they lost 31 players in the portal. I mean, that is akin to what LSU lost after Ogeron was fired. Like how dramatically you're turning over your roster. But LSU won 10 games. Well, they went 9-3, beat Bama, and won the bowl game and got to 10 wins. So I don't think it's impossible for Elko at A&M to have a nice season. But man, it's going to be just a dramatically different look all the way around for Texas A&M next year.
And on the flip side of that, Alabama, even with Milrow back, 98th in returning production. I found that kind of surprising as well. 53%, just because Jalen Milrow did account for so much, and you think it could be a little bit. I think that illustrates how much they lost.
But that's offense and defense, though, right?
Yes, it is. It is offense and defense.
Well, shoot, they lost Caleb Downs, who's their leading tackler.
64% returning on offense, 42% returning on defense.
That makes more sense. Still, wow. Good luck, Kalen DeBoer, but not really. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.